Welcome to day one of the 2021 DSU electoral debates. My name is Kate and I am your Chief Returning Officer for the 2020-2021 academic year. I will open the debate by providing a land acknowledgement before handing it over to the moderator, Claire. The DSU resides on traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Lenni or Mi'kmaq people. I encourage those of you who are not residing in modern-day Halifax to use the resources like Whose Land to learn which traditional territory you reside on. I ask everyone to pay particular attention and care about our presence on this land in mind, and how we contribute to reconciliation, unlearning, and relearning as we enter into these dialogues regarding our institutions. Before I hand the debate over to Claire, I want to just reiterate some important points for the audience's reference. Before I begin, I would like to mention that closed captioning is available on your lower right-hand quadrant with the closed captioning symbol. This will also be reiterated in an announcement in the Q&A section. Viewers may ask questions of candidates that may be asked during the debates using the Q&A function in the chat. Some of these questions may be selected to be presented to candidates. All candidates will be asked questions that have been prepared by the Elections Committee or provided by the student body. The candidates are aware of the decorum and respect that must be held within this debate, and the moderation team reserves the right to use tools at their disposal to remain a respectful and cordial debate. With that being said, I will pass it over to Claire to introduce our first debate. Over to you, Claire.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the presidential question and answer period. My name's Claire, and I'll be your moderator this evening. So our only presidential candidate is Maddie, so after I go over the rules, I will pass it over to her to give her a chance to introduce herself. So the rules are as follows. The candidates are required to have cameras and mics on. Each candidate will receive 90 seconds to respond to the proposed question. Timing begins after 5 seconds of silence or when the candidate begins speaking. Candidates must not go over time and will be cut off if they do. Candidates must not address each other or the audience, and fines shall be levied at the discretion of the Elections Committee should offenses or disrespectful behavior begin during the debate. Okay, and so I will hand it over to Maddie now.
Thanks, Claire. So my name is Maddie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am this year's DSU presidential candidate. I'm also a fourth-year Bachelor of Management student doing my major in Environment, Society, and Sustainability, and a minor in Security Studies with the Political Science Department. And I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, Claire.
All right, thanks, Maddie. So I will now start with the first question, and that is, what do you think is the most pressing issue to the Dalhousie community right now?
I think our most pressing issue for students right now is definitely tuition. It's been an issue in Nova Scotia for a few years, and Nova Scotia has one of the highest rates of tuition out of all of Canada, and our students have continuously told us that the 3% increases we're seeing in tuition annually aren't sustainable, and the DSU has been advocating for those things. I really agree that the way that Dalhousie approaches education is more like a business, where it really should be an organization. The goal should be to see youth and community educated so that we can have a better future and we can build towards that. So things like universally accessible education are extremely important, but Dal's governance framework and their operation framework really don't afford for that right now. So that's something that I would be really interested to keep advocating for, and to learn how students think we can approach the situation with more creativity and innovation. Thanks, Claire.
Okay. Thanks, Maddie. The next question is, what do you plan to do in your first semester in office?
During my first semester, the focus really needs to be on setting a good foundation for the rest of the year. And I like to do that by sitting down with students and figuring out what their concerns, thoughts, and feelings are about the year. That way we can build a plan that works for everyone. I feel really strongly that the DSU and what the DSU does shouldn't be a reflection of who's in office. It shouldn't be a transition year to year. The vision shouldn't change that much because our student body stays consistent for 4 years. We really should be reflecting what students want. So listening to them, developing a plan in coordination with students is extremely important. For this year, I really want to focus on doing that by assessing our governance structure and our governing documents and working on our strategic plan. Both of those things require heavy consultation from the student body because students should be able to decide how the DSU works and what our vision is. And that strategic plan really builds on creating that consistency and stability for the union, which I think is important. So the first semester is about sitting down, listening to students, and starting to build the framework for those documents so that we can spend the rest of the year finding out what really works, what doesn't, making edits, and then building something that works for everyone. Thanks, Claire.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Maddie. Next question. What's something unique that you bring to the role, and how do you plan on putting that into action?
I think something unique that I bring to the role is a different perspective. The DSU traditionally hasn't been run by management students. This year we had 2 management students on the executive, and I think it really brought in something that the DSU was missing, and that was a bit of planning and strategy that we haven't seen in the past. And I think by bringing in this perspective, it allowed us to get the framework, to solidify the framework. We had students who could plan things, who could organize well. We had those hard skills, which allowed us to spend more time doing other things. It meant that we could take up initiatives in the short term. We could respond immediately to student needs, and we could build off what was solid so that there was more room to do what was needed. I also think that the added benefit that I am an incumbent candidate means that I can provide a bit of stability. There's less of a learning curve when you're coming in for a second term, which gives a bit more strength to the union. We can keep conversations going that started last year. We can continue them without a transition, and really build off the relationships that were started this year. So I think that that's incredibly important too. Thanks, Claire.
Okay, perfect. So what does an accessible executive/council look like for you, and what will you be doing to make yourself accessible?
An accessible executive and council to me means that from the start, we're being transparent. We're being honest about things, and when something comes to the table of the executive and council, it's going out in a way that's meaningful to students. That looks like making our website accessible so that our news and council documents are always there. Students don't have to go looking for them and click 15 times to find the right link to see what council is talking about. It also looks like making sure anyone who wants access can reach out to any of the executive or any counselor, and they have the right tools to ensure that students know what's going on. I also think that our council probably needs to do a bit more work in the COVID era of figuring out what accessible meetings look like. Teams really isn't the best function to have a council meeting. We figured that out pretty well this year. It comes with a lot of issues. So working on making sure that students feel like they can drop in, counselors feel like they can say what they need to say and they have the right space to do so. But when it comes down to it, it just having an accessible executive and council means that those are 2 bodies that are welcoming and friendly to everyone, because I think one of the biggest barriers to access for the DSU is that students feel like they're not connected and they don't have the right space. So thanks, Claire.
All right, awesome. So, you just spoke a little bit about COVID. What are your plans regarding a safe return to campus potentially this fall?
That's something that has come up a lot this year. COVID definitely threw a wrench into everything that the DSU does. We had to change a lot. But when it comes to this fall, a safe return means that it's a safe return for everyone. The last thing that I think we would like to see is some students welcome back to campus and others not. So some students fall behind in their degrees because their classes are only offered in person, or students who don't feel comfortable coming back to classes of 100 kids find a way that they can still access their education without being forced onto campus. It also looks like making sure international students aren't left on their own again, which I think was a really big issue this year. Our international students weren't supported in the way that they should have been. So finding a way that means that domestic students and international students who are place-bound have equal opportunity. That's also incredibly important. But it also just looks like making sure students have the tools to succeed, knowing what it means to be on campus in a safe way, having the right communication, the right tools, and I keep saying that, but I think it's really important because students traditionally aren't given those things. They're not given what they need to succeed, and that puts up so many barriers because those are the basics, and if we don't have the basics, then it's really hard to find a way to move forward. Thanks, Claire.
All right, so in a similar vein, in terms of making all students feel welcome, how will you support the Asian and Pacific Islander students who may feel anxious returning to campus due to COVID-19 related racism and violence?
That's a very important question and something that has come up a lot this year as well. It starts first and foremost by the DSU saying that racism isn't welcome on our campus. And if folks have an issue with students who are international and are coming back to Nova Scotia to study, then they need to take a moment, examine where those feelings come from and deal with them on their own and make sure they're not projecting those feelings onto our students who are coming here, because that's not fair. But what it really looks like is listening to those students who have those concerns and figuring out what the DSU can do for them by listening to them, because we at the DSU could come up with so many ideas. We could put out a statement, we could come up with a plan, but it's really important that those things are student directed and that the DSU is there to support in any way we can. I would never want to see us make a step that wasn't supported by those students, because then it's not working together, it's working parallel and not necessarily in tandem. But yeah, I think it just starts by reassuring those students that the DSU can be a safe space for them and that we will be there to back them up. Thanks, Claire.
All right, awesome. So as you spoke a little bit when you talked about the most important issue about tuition increases, do you mind elaborating a little bit on what your plan is on preventing the tuition raises and the unsustainable raises from taking place?
Yeah, of course. So the 3% increases happen annually as a result of a memorandum of understanding between Dalhousie and the province, where the province basically says that Dal can raise up to 3% every year. And that started in 2019. And since then, they've taken that opportunity at every step, even though all the student representatives on the Board of Governors voted against it in 2020. So for this year, I think it's important, first of all, that the DSU and the KSU, which is the King's Student Union, work together. We haven't always in the past, and I think that it's important we share a fee structure. The King's students face the same fee increases that Dallas students do. So I think it's incredibly important that we work together, but also that we start finding more creative ways to address it, because in the past we've tried rallies, we've tried campaigns, and unfortunately our Board of Governors hasn't taken notice or interest in listening to the student body. So I honestly think it's time that we go a little bit bigger, we get a little bit more radical about it, and we show the Board of Governors that just because they haven't listened in the past doesn't mean we're not going to come back and that it's not still important. And if they won't listen to us when we write letters and we give speeches, then we'll find another way to make them listen to us, because accessible education is the future of education, and Dal needs to get on board. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome. So the DSU drug plan currently puts an additional cap on certain drugs, including PrEP. This creates out-of-pocket expenses that disproportionately target vulnerable populations. So is this an issue that you wish to address, and how do you plan on addressing it, if so?
There have definitely been some concerns about the health plan that have come up this year, and I think that those are very fair. It's obviously very important that all of our students understand what healthcare they have access to, and why certain things aren't included. I personally don't know why certain drugs are excluded. I haven't looked into it that much. The health plan falls more under the portfolio of a different executive, but all executives are involved in it. So I think when it comes to addressing certain things that aren't included, students should feel welcome to come to the DSU, to reach out. If there's an issue that we don't know about, we can't advocate for it. And something like PrEP not being included in the health plan wasn't something I was aware of until just now. But that being said, just because I didn't know doesn't mean I'm not open to working with people to find a solution. And at the end of the day, if there's a problem, it's my job to respond to it. So anything that comes up, I'm more than happy to work on. But in this particular circumstance, it's definitely important to listen to the students who are impacted by those cuts and by the drugs that aren't included, and find a way to either make sure that those drugs are included in the health plan in the future, or find another way to ensure that those students have access to the medications that they need, because that's very important, and we want all students to have equal access to their healthcare so they have equal opportunity to succeed. Thanks, Claire.
All right, great. So what is your stance on the Canadian Federation of Students?
This is a good question, and I think if folks were around last year, they probably know. I'm not a fan of the Canadian Federation of Students. I think that the Canadian Federation does good work for some students and for some institutions, and that's fair. I don't want to alienate any schools that are part of the CFS and really enjoy it. I think it works especially well for institutions or for student unions that have smaller populations and fewer resources. But the DSU does have quite a few resources, and we are quite a large student union. But more than anything, I think the way that CFS was approached on our campus, it really wasn't done in a way that was responsible or made the student body feel reassured in what was happening. There was a lot of misinformation. There were a lot of tense feelings. People felt like they weren't involved. They didn't understand what was going on, that a decision was made without full awareness of the student body and full input. And that's very fair. My stance is that I think we are still currently prospective members of the CFS because we haven't held a referendum. And I've spoken with CFS. They are still intending on holding a referendum, but they have to do so in person. So COVID has prevented them from doing that. But at the end of the day, it's up to students to decide. So when we can hold a fair, responsible referendum question, that's what we'll do. Thanks, Claire.
Okay, awesome. So you've talked a little bit about some of your policy points, but could you describe some other aspects of your platform?
Yeah, for sure. So my platform is community, sustainability, and accountability. I think community is probably one that I don't talk about the most. And for me, that means making sure students feel welcome here and like they're supported. I often say that I love the Dalhousie community, but I'm not always a fan of the institution. And I think that a lot of students feel that way. A lot of us come to Halifax. I'm originally from Ontario. A lot of us come to Halifax because of the community and because of the people who are here. But things like COVID and other issues on campus really have separated students. So part of the community aspect of my platform is to do everything that I can to create opportunities for students to connect, celebrate one another, support one another, and just, be that system for each other, because that system is what got me through the last 4 years of my degree. And so I want that to be something that every student can experience. Thanks, Claire.
All right, awesome. So we talked a little bit earlier about accessibility. So could you talk about what issues at Dalhousie, what current accessibility issues Dalhousie has and how you plan on fixing those specific problems?
There are quite a few, unfortunately. A good example is access to proper mental health and, in general, health resources on campus. For example, the Dal Health Clinic has a lack of racially diverse practitioners, psychologists, counselors. That's an issue for students because they feel like they're not represented there and they're not heard. There's also a lack of queer people in that office, so going there is not always a safe space for students, which is a big issue. DAL has recently committed to hiring, I think, one Black counselor, and they're quite excited about that, but I think that that's a very small step, and there's a lot more left to do. Other accessibility issues look like online schooling and how inaccessible it is for students who are hearing impaired or visually impaired, and how that works in an online education. Even in class, some students who face learning disabilities, they have other reasons why they can't take their own notes. They rely on volunteer note takers who get paid a very small honorarium per semester to take those notes. And I think we should have a more structured system for those students that's more reliable, because I know if someone had to rely on my notes from class, it probably wouldn't go over well. So I think there should be a system that supports our students better, but also pays students who are volunteering their time for the work that they're doing. Yeah, thanks, Claire.
Thank you. All right, so you had to fill out a candidate questionnaire when all this started. So what are your action plans for implementing those items that you outlined?
For my top 3 goals, the first was to finish our governance review, and that's something that's underway right now. We started working with a law firm who's going to do the same thing that happened first in 2015, and they essentially go over our entire governing documents and provide areas where there are contradictions, loopholes, places where we can be more concise, because we have quite a few policies compared to other students' unions. And so supporting that looks like working with them to identify issues, but then it also means taking that document that outlines all of the things that we can change, working with the bylaw policy and review committee to approve those amendments, and then bringing them to council for approval, and not forgetting to consult students in the mix. So that's a plan for the first one. The second was working on our strategic plan, and that starts with consultation and brainstorming. So finding a group of students who are interested in the strategic future of the union, figuring out what they value, and working off the draft strategic plan that was made in the 2019-20 year. So that's a lot of extensive consultation. That just means sitting down with students and listening to what they want for our future. And the third was focusing on getting students back to campus in a safe manner. Right now, I sit on something called the Dalhousie Return to Campus Executive Committee, which is the governing body that oversees our return. So it just means making sure the student voice is present there and continuing to stay involved in that conversation. Thanks, Claire.
All right, awesome. So this is going to be the last question before I go to your closing statement. So why should voters vote for you?
I think students should vote in general. I'm less concerned about who you vote for and more concerned that students are involved in the democratic processes of the union. If you want to vote for me, I think I bring strengths in stability for the union. I think I come with a lot of experience over the last year and organization. And I also think that I've proven that I'm willing to be honest and open with students and work hand in hand with them. But at the end of the day, I'd rather you just vote in the election than stop you from voting because you don't want to vote for me. So the moral of the story is just vote. Doesn't matter who it's for, just be involved. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome. All right, so at this point, we're at about 7:25 right now. So I'll get you to just do a closing statement and then we'll be all done with the presidential Q&A.
Okay, I think to close it off, I would just say that this year has been kind of a whirlwind. We found out that campus was closing the day after last year's election results were announced. So we got thrown into COVID right at the start of things, and hasn't been a perfect year. There have definitely been hiccups. There have been big mistakes. There have been a lot of learning curves, but all of those failures amount to a lot of experience that I think I bring to the table, and I'd be really happy to share with students. And the reason why I'm running is because I'm passionate about my peers, and if I hadn't been supported by the students I was, my degree would look a lot different. So I'm just here to do what I can to give back and try and give every student the opportunities that I had. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
All right, wonderful. So thanks so much, Maddie, for being here tonight, and thanks for all your awesome answers to all the questions. So at this point, we're going to have a 5-minute break before the next Q&A, which will be VPAE. So we'll see you all back here in 5 minutes.
Hi, Claire. Would you mind unmuting yourself?
Sorry about that. So welcome back, everyone, to the Q&A sessions for this evening. Up next is the VPAE, so academic and external, and our candidate is Hannah. So just to reiterate the rules really quickly, candidates are required to have their cameras and mics on. Each candidate will receive 90 seconds to respond to the proposed question. Timing begins after 5 seconds of silence or when the candidate begins speaking. Candidates must not go over time and they will be cut off if they do. Candidates must not address each other or the audience, and fines shall be levied at the discretion of the elections committee should offenses or disrespectful behavior occur at any time during the debate. So I'll now hand it over to Hannah to give herself a short introduction.
Bonjour, hello. My name is Hannah Sarita-Beaulieu, and I'm running for VPAE to assure that all of our voices are heard. Education is a fundamental right to all, and we deserve a say in how these systems operate. Thank you, Claire.
All right, fantastic. We'll now start with the questions. So, what do you think is the most pressing issue to the Dalhousie community right now?
I believe our most pressing issue is advocacy for mental health services. I believe that we are in a desperate need to end a one-size-fits-all approach. Our same-day counseling services are inaccessible for students, and our counselors should have a trauma-informed approach to acknowledge the role that trauma plays in people's lives, as the support is incredibly vital to student success and just navigating institutions in general, as well as accurate risk assessments for students, and to potentially partner with external sources to provide more resources for Dalhousie students. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome, thank you. So what do you plan to do in your first semester in office?
There are so many things that I'd love to do. Definitely in the first semester, I would like to begin to imply a 3-step approach to combating racism on campus. So this would start with the first phase of being accountability. So publicly acknowledge the university's racist past and denounce racism before and after incidents. Phase 2 of this looks like countering racism. So to increase funding to services available on campus. And phase 3 of this would be able to create an equitable society, so more access to services for racialized as well as non-racialized students, more education, as well as lowering tuition to make the university space more accessible. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, perfect. So you just spoke about lowering the tuition. So that says your stance on the tuition increase, but what is your plan towards preventing it from taking place?
I believe that education is not only for the rich and elite. We all have this fundamental right to educate ourselves and better ourselves. And I mean, that's a large part of why many students are in university, to gain more knowledge. Especially our international students are faced with the worst of this, with their tuition fees being so much higher than domestic or even out of province students. And especially with the pandemic, the quality of education that we're receiving is not the same. It is not to the same standard. And it's unjustified for our university to be the second highest tuition in Canada for the standard that we're receiving. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much. So how do you plan to uplift traditionally suppressed voices in your leadership?
As I mentioned earlier, I would really like to impose this sort of 3-phase approach to combating racism and helping our marginalized communities have their voices heard. I like to use this analogy often of the hats that we wear. So some of the hats that I wear is I'm an Indigenous woman, I'm a graffiti artist, I'm a bisexual woman, I'm a student. But the reality of this is the spaces that we're navigating try to limit how we express these hats and how we navigate them, when in reality we can learn from them, we can learn about them, and it's really to find an approach where everybody feels comfortable to a certain extent to really demonstrate these hats and share different parts of themselves to facilitate change. Thank you.
All right. So The DSU drug plan currently puts an additional cap on certain drugs, including PrEP. This creates out-of-pocket expenses that disproportionately target vulnerable populations. So is this an issue that you wish to address, and how will you address it?
Absolutely, it's an issue that I'd like to address. It isn't something in specific that I knew prior to the first time the question was asked, but I'm just sitting here and reflecting on it. It's not fair that certain drugs are limited and certain are more widely available. And I think our health plan is something that definitely needs to be looked into further, of what services and what medications are available to students. I'm more aware of the mental health service aspect of it. And for example, even if 100% of psychology appointments are covered through our health insurance plan, there's only $1,000 available, and at $200 an hour, that's only 5 appointments. So students are left in this position of either going to the same day counseling services, which aren't necessarily serving the student body, or going to 5 really rushed appointments that, especially if you're unpacking trauma, there's a lot more required. So I think in general, our health plan needs to be revisited for students. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. What does advocating for students specifically mean to you, and how does that appear in practice?
I think this really starts with creating a community approach. So to speak with students and meet with them and hear their stories, because I'm only one individual, I don't have the voice for the 20,000 students that we're representing. And I think it's really important to go back to these discussions in the form of a town hall or more flexible office hours, just to sort of build relationships, to really learn who I'm representing. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so in your opinion, what is the biggest issue regarding academics that Dalhousie students are facing right now?
As I mentioned earlier, I really believe that access to not only equitable resources, but also advocating for mental health services on campus, as well as combating racism on campus. Those are my sort of top 2 priorities. And they're definitely a lot to unpack, and there are numerous approaches to go about it. But like I said before, it's really to partner with external services such as mental health practitioners, to explore the possibility of even like a student rate or something of that variety, as well as really acknowledging the colonial history of our university to be able to progress forwards and build a mutually beneficial but also a sustainable relationship between the university and the student body. Thank you.
All right. Is supporting survivors of sexual violence important to you? And if so, how do you plan to support survivors when you're in office?
Absolutely. As a survivor myself, I believe that we need to believe survivors and hear their stories, but also do this in a way that does not re-traumatize those that choose to share their stories. And as I said before, our same-day counseling services and counseling services offered on campus are not adequate for survivors or those who are carrying trauma, because our services are not trauma informed. They aren't acknowledging that trauma is relived in a million different ways, and it changes based on the person, and the risk assessments that are provided by our mental health services on campus are not suitable. They're not helping us progress forwards, and they're not allowing us to make concrete changes, as well as having more racialized practitioners, services to people that have had the same experiences, so we don't feel judged as well, and we're able to share our stories and create changes within the space. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So what committees do you plan on sitting on next year, and what will you bring to those committees?
I'd love to sit on the equity services, like the equity services committee, because that is something that is an issue that is very close to my heart. I believe that we shouldn't offer equal services, but equitable services, because everybody's in different needs and has different levels of needs. And that's incredibly important to have those discussions and really open the doors to finding more equitable approaches, especially given the transition to this online environment, that we're not really certain of when we're going back on campus. It's puts students in a very sort of awkward position because a lot of these solutions that have been presented to us are temporary measures, and we're sort of in this in between where we don't really know what's going on. But definitely to explore more of those issues and really hear from the student body about what changes they would like to see. Thanks.
Okay. So what is one unique thing that you think you could bring to the role, and how do you plan on putting that aspect into action?
Yeah, so I guess going way back in high school, I was vice president of a Francophone Youth Board, which represented over 25,000 French language students in Ontario. And that was a really amazing opportunity because I not only worked with the provincial legislative assembly, to create policy changes for Francophone youth specifically, but after I left that youth board, I really got involved in the graffiti community in Toronto, and a lot of my projects were surrounding community-based. So it's really to learn about each other, from each other, in order to create something that not only represented the community, but those who are part of the specific project. And I think that experience, or those experiences, kind of leverage into this role because I not only have the background in the political sense, but also understanding of how to speak to community members and to create and facilitate safe spaces for those to feel as though they can share their stories. Thanks, Claire.
All right, fantastic. So our next question is live from the audience. So how do you intend to advocate for a diverse student while also advocating for academic expression, especially in light of incidents in this area at other, how do you intend to advocate for a diverse student body while also advocating for academic expression, especially in light of incidents in this area at other Atlantic universities here in Canada?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry. How do you intend to advocate for a diverse student body while also advocating for academic expression, especially in light of incidents in this area at other Atlantic universities?
Okay. Can you repeat it once more? I just want to make sure I get all the parts of it.
Sure, no worries. So how do you intend to advocate for a diverse student body while also advocating for academic expression, especially in light of incidents in this area at other Atlantic universities in Canada?
Okay, so in terms of advocating for racialized and marginalized students, it's kind of back to that three-step approach of really acknowledging the faults or past mistakes that the university has made in order to progress forwards. And I think that kind of falls into the 6 pillars of my platform, which is to learn, to relearn, to unlearn, as the first 3 parts, because it's not only important to keep the knowledge going and to keep learning more, but also to revisit those core values, to relearn things that have been shared with us, and as well to unlearn as we progress forwards and learn new information. And I think it's that balance between those 3 elements that would really enable us to create an action plan to help support students, and especially to, sorry, the second part of the question in regards to academic, sorry, I can't remember the word, to really help our voices. I think there's also a fine line between being productive and being helpful for these specific communities and being harmful. So I think it's really important to learn from our histories and our legacies to find a more sustainable approach to progress forwards. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, thank you. So what do you think are some, or sorry, so what does an accessible executive and council look like to you, and what will you be doing to make yourself accessible?
I think an accessible council looks like moving within our 3 campuses to assure all our students are heard. The reality of students on the Truro campus versus the Sexton campus versus the Halifax campus are very they're three very different lived experiences, not only based on program, but also the general environment. And I think creating a more accessible space would be to go freely within those three campuses and really hear the voices of students from those three realities, as well as creating more open office hours, providing more resources for students so they don't have to dig around to find the information that they need, and as well as creating some form of town halls, whether this be in person or online. Of course, this depends on how the fall plays out, but really to start that community consultation and to build an action plan for students, but also by students. Thanks, Claire.
All right, awesome. So what is your stance on the Canadian Federation of Students?
I am not the biggest fan. I don't believe that sort of an overarching institution should have the power to completely denounce other student unions, let alone bankrupt them. And I think that there's definitely a need for more accountability and oversight off of student unions. But I don't believe that this has to come in the form of another overarching sort of institution. And I think that rebuilding this trust and rebuilding the relationship sort of starts from home, especially when the Dalhousie community is so large and so diverse. I would be, of course, open to working with the CFS. As Maddie said, it would really be up to the student body to decide whether we bring in the CFS or not, but my personal stance is I don't necessarily support it. But thank you, Claire.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And next question is, what does an accessible campus mean to you? So you've spoken a bit about the health services, but for the rest of campus as well, maybe.
An accessible campus really, there are different levels to being accessible. So there are physical accessibility needs, there are mental accessibility needs, as well as the creation of safe and open environments that students feel safe navigating. I think one of the largest things that I've seen is it gets really dark on campus at night. And while we have those like the emergency post on campus, as well as the services from Dal Security, that's definitely something that I'd like to look into further, of making more lights, or not making more lights, but adding more lights to campus to really brighten it up in the evening so people feel more safe walking around campus, as well as really in terms of accessibility services, to really add another layer of transparency to show students, hey, here are all the services that you have available to you. Here's where to go or how to go, and different ways to communicate with the people in those required areas, and really help promote that more to the student body, because I find it's very difficult to find what you need, and that definitely needs to change. But thanks, Claire. Oh, you're still muted.
My bad. So how do you plan on supporting Asian and Pacific Islander students who may feel anxious to return to campus due to COVID-19 related racism and violence?
So naturally, I'm still in Halifax, so my environment hasn't physically changed throughout the pandemic, and I've been very fortunate for this. Now, on the other hand, there are a bunch of international students that don't really know what the fall is going to look like or how we're going to transition back into in-person. And I think it's really important to not only build an action plan, because we need to stop seeing this pandemic as temporary, as waiting until the next day, waiting until we can go back to in-person. It's not fair for students to really wait semester to semester to get updates from the university and kind of feel left in the dark. We need to find a way to rebuild this environment instead of just waiting on these changes. And specifically for other international students, this comes in the way of consulting them and specifically asking for what are the tools that you need to feel safe on campus? What are the tools that will help you facilitate this return and to feel comfortable within the university space? Back to you, Claire.
All right, thank you so much. So how do you plan on supporting unique needs of graduate students?
Once again, this really goes back to the core of my platform, which is community consultation. So really working with graduate students and working with the graduate representatives to understand their needs, because the reality that we're facing right now is everything is transitioned to online. We don't know when things are going back to in-person, and that experience is completely different than what it is like to be on the physical university space. And as I mentioned before, the online learning services are not inaccessible, and we need more concrete measures to know, okay, we have a plan if we go back in person, but also how are we going to streamline the online services further? Thanks.
All right, fantastic. So what is a student issue that you are very passionate about, and why are you passionate about that issue? Maybe one that you haven't spoken about so far.
I'd like to really build more spaces for allies and more spaces that students feel represented, especially within the Board of Governors. I think that that's a tremendous opportunity to really open that door, and with all like the consultation that I hope to do, to really bring those voices and those ideas directly to the governing body of the university to assure that we can start kind of make the snowball effect to have important decisions made, and as well to be an open ear so students' concerns can be brought forward to these meetings. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So in your candidate questionnaire, you would have outlined several items. So what are those items, and how do you plan on implementing them?
So my platform surrounds 6 pillars. So it's learning, relearning, and unlearning, resilience, accountability, and trust. So when I broke this down, to learn is to constantly progress forwards and seek new knowledge. To relearn is to understand that things change over time, and especially when new information or even research comes to light. To unlearn is the ability to revisit these core values and learn from the past in order to create a sustainable future and acknowledge whatever mistakes or faults may have came up. Resilience, to recover quickly and have flexibility. Accountability, to be transparent and own up to our mistakes as well as progress forwards. And trust, which is the most important pillar of my platform, because our experiences are not always the same as our peers, but more often than not, we carry the same burdens. So it's important for me to build a trusting relationship with those I'll represent that can become mutually beneficial. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome, thank you, Hannah. So this is the last question before I'll give you a chance to do some concluding statements. Why should voters vote for you?
I think we should vote in general. Of course, it helps make things move forwards quickly, and it assures that the student body is heard and counted within the votes. To vote for me in general, I think that I bring a new perspective to the table, especially given the extensive community work that I have done, and especially working as a graffiti artist. A lot more often than not, I am listening rather than explaining, and I think it would really bring a new face to the DSU, which could be fun. Thanks, Claire.
All right, fantastic. So thanks so much, Hannah. And I'll just give you, actually, I've got one more question from the audience, and then we'll do our closing statement. So what is your opinion on the level of academic integrity in online learning?
I think it's really confusing for students because on one hand, we're getting these really scary emails that are saying, well, if you're cheating, you're going to get kicked out. But then on the other hand, online just doesn't feel the same as in person, and I definitely don't think we're getting the same quality of education. But in terms of academic integrity, it really varies based off program to program, and that's what's really confusing for students. Especially it's because the resources aren't there to know, well, what happens? What happens if I get that email, or what happens if I have to attend that meeting? But really, we need to provide students with a transparent approach of what is this process, how do we go through it, and what are our next steps, and what are options for students as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, that wraps up the questions, but I'll just give you a time slot here to do some concluding remarks.
Perfect. So I think we've gone underrepresented for far too long, and especially in a time where nothing is guaranteed, our students deserve to have someone that'll represent them and their best interest. Our experience as students are unique, and especially now more than ever. So I guess I'll leave you with a quote from Melinda Smith, a professor at the University of Calgary. And her quote is, "In a world shaped by uncertainty and division, we need engaged leadership that is committed to connecting with diverse talent and communities, capable of thinking beyond tired cliches, adopting and envisioning alternative possibilities, and able to design and advance strategies and policies for more equitable and sustainable futures." So use your voice, and I encourage you all to vote on March 8th. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Hannah, for all your answers and for being here tonight. We're now gonna take another 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for another question and answer statement or period. So the next one will be for the LGBTQ+ rep. And yeah, we'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome, Tam. So I'm just going to go over the rules quickly again. So candidates are required to have cameras and mics on. Each candidate will receive 90 seconds to respond to the proposed question. Timing begins after 5 seconds of silence or when the candidate begins speaking. Candidates must not go over time and will be cut off if they do go over time. Candidates must not address each other or the audience. Fines shall be levied at the discretion of the Elections Committee should offenses or disrespectful behavior occur during the debate. So now I'll hand it over to Tam to do a quick introduction of themselves.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tam. My pronouns are they, she, he, and I also use my Vietnamese pronoun, Jen. I am a PhD candidate grad student in Rainy Lab, working for the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology for FMGSS, as a part of FMGSS. Sorry. Thanks, Claire.
All right, fantastic. So first question, what do you think is the most pressing issue to the Dalhousie community right now?
My interest in running for this position is health and accessibility, especially as an LGBTQ representative. I am passionate about how we can make the health plans more accessible especially for folks under the rainbow community, with the training for a trauma-informed and lens, and also for anti-oppression lens as well. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome, thank you. So what do you plan on doing in your first semester in office?
So I have a couple things I wanted to address. First off is having more of a community dialogue among students, especially, so there are different ways I can go around this, either through drafting a survey, sending out to students, especially students specifically cater for marginalized identities, and also throughout that survey, we can hopefully be able to address some of these key pillar issues that, especially for rainbow communities, students are facing. And with that, hopefully we can prioritize and bring these issues up to the table, especially as the DSU caucus, Senate caucus, and addressing that even at the Dow Senate caucus as well. Thanks.
All right, awesome, thank you. So what is your plan to best represent your constituents?
Sorry, constituents, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I myself am identified as a pansexual, gender fluid person of color. So with that being said, I'm already my identity is an intersectional experience, living experience as a QT BIPOC. So in itself, I've already have that living experience as an LGBTQ person of color, and I wanted to be able to bring that intersectional lens towards the table, especially at the caucus level, and having my voice represent these students, holding, of course, looking at ways that we can reimagine and creating Dalhousie in a way that it can be a safe space, accessible and equitable for other folks as well. Thanks, Claire.
All right, thank you. So what does equity mean to you?
Equity means to me that we're not trying to, so I guess there are a lot of misconceptions in thinking that equity is similar to equality, in the sense that we always imagine equality as rights for same rights for everyone. However, the reality is society is not always the same. We're not always gonna receive the same type of treatments, the same type of access. So having equity in this case for me means that folks have catering type of access that they would need, that they often don't. So that to me is equity, meaning that giving the right resource to the right group of people, and especially as a marginalized marginalized person of color, I wanted to be able to address that and cater that towards the rainbow community, especially. Thanks, Claire.
All right, fantastic. So a question from the audience. LGBTQ plus students face many issues on campus in addition to healthcare. So would you be able to expand more upon your knowledge and plans for other issues that the rainbow community faces?
There are a lot of issues that we're facing. First off is in terms of drug plans, we especially with COVID and the health plans that we were giving at there is a need for PrEP access throughout Nova Scotia, especially for rural communities and people of color. It's always the case for African Nova Scotian and Indigenous communities living on the rural areas. And also the coverage plan is not. It's not always getting to the right hands, let's just say. And also one thing that I've noticed is that in terms of hormone therapy, we're also having a lot of issues in terms of access need for testosterone, estrogen, and other and the right resources for trans folks. Another thing that I also that's also very I guess like very strong, like key issue for me is mental health access, and especially with the right access where health practitioners are trauma informed, are queer informed, and also are themselves somewhat either identify in the QT communities. That's something that I'm very passionate to discuss more about. Thanks, Claire.
All right, thank you. So you spoke about some of the issues that the LGBTQ community faces, such as PrEP and hormones that are necessary for the community. So how do you plan on addressing these issues and working towards fixing them?
First few things I wanted to address is, as I said, like with the community dialogue, with the survey, and hopefully be able to send it out to students. I wanted to be able to attacking each of them one by one, I guess you would say, having that building that community trust, at the same time ensuring folks that I am representing the rainbow community, and also I'm sorry, can you repeat the questions? I just want to make sure that I understand.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it was the issues that you've brought up. What are your plans to try and ameliorate or work towards solving these problems?
Yeah, so my hope in order to resolve or at least addressing the issue is to bring it to bring my voice and my perspective, and also representing the rainbow community students when I go up to let's say the DSU caucus or the Dalhousie Senate caucus. Hopefully that will be something that I can do, and I will be able to I guess like in a way reimagine on how we can really expand out the coverage plan for folks. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. So what is something unique that you will bring to the role, and how do you plan on putting that into action?
Yes, so I think unique. I feel like I am myself, have a unique living experience, but at the same time, quite an intersectional experience to us LGBTQ plus community, and to the Dow Senate caucus, and I myself also a grad student, so I would look at things in a way that can best serve the interests of not only undergrad students, but also grad students who are also facing a lot of challenges in terms of health and accessibility, especially when it comes to mental health. I'm just a very vocal person in the sense that I will look at things and from a praxis lens in the sense that I don't like to just talk about it, but also practice it. But yeah, that's it. Thanks, Claire.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's very insightful. So for our next question, what do you plan on doing to connect with the community in this time when connection is so difficult?
To me, being connected to the community is not only just through not just through like person-in-person communication or a virtual, through just regular virtual communication as due to COVID, but also being able to build that reliability, that trust, that saying that I myself will represent folks under that I said I am representing, and also be able to bring folks' voice over to the table and have that I guess like that input, that power to be able to speak on behalf of folks. I know that's not really like my experience, definitely limited. So that's why I also wanted to open that conversation, that community dialogue, so I can also bring those all those issues that I haven't had the chance to experience or to address in the beginning, to add it furthermore into the table. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. So how do you plan on uplifting traditionally suppressed voices in your leadership?
I think so sorry, traditional, can I just clarify? So traditional praxis voices, right?
Sorry, what was that?
What was
traditionally suppressed voices?
Suppressed, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, traditional suppressed voices. So the question is to, sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I understand correctly. So to bring, can you repeat it again? Sorry about that.
Yeah, sure. I'll paraphrase it. How do you plan on bringing voices to the table that are usually not given a platform?
How do I do that? Okay, yeah. So there are. So I have mentioned about having that community dialogue, but also be able to stand my ground and be able to. I think that's very important in the sense that oftentimes suppressed voices aren't being heard or even didn't get the opportunity to raise. So I wanted to be able to stand my ground and showing that I have that capability and I can gather opinions and I guess like address issues, concern from students up to the Senate.
Okay, thank you so much. So as a grad student, you have a bit of a unique position. So what will you do to support graduate students' unique needs?
So yes, so I have thought about this, and there are in terms of supporting graduate students, I have always been involved in the sense that I am part of the FMGSS, Faculty of Medicine Graduate Student Society, and I have always been pushing for mental health support, peer support network for graduate students. And I wanted to be able to address these issues, but at the same time also looking at it from an intersectional lens as a QT BIPOC, as a queer person of color, and implementing these EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion proposal into workshops, into the peer support network, so we can better support graduate students in that sense. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. So another question from the audience. Why are you so passionate about this position specifically?
I'm passionate because I am myself queer to BIPOC. I am myself a part of the community, and oftentimes that the more intersectional you are, I feel like the more likely you are going to be marginalized, are suppressed, and are unheard. And I personally believe that folks who are in marginalized communities should try to best, or at least be more involved in terms of raising their voice, their concern, because if we leave it for folks that don't know your experience, sometimes they don't really know these issues, and some of them can be swept under the rug, and you would never be able to have the issue that best serve your interests being brought to the table. Thanks, Claire.
Fantastic, thank you. Is supporting survivors of sexualized violence important to you? And if so, how do you plan to support survivors when in office?
Yes. So yes, I am in full support of survivor of sexualized violence. And to be honest, what was it I was going to say? Yes, I'm in support of it, and and in order to even to show, or I guess like in a way to practice my support, I usually think of it as like how can we better serve sexualized violence survivors, and one of the way that I think it's important is you need to have trauma-informed training, and we need to have anti-oppressions training and diversity inclusivity training, because from what we know in terms of health practitioners, there weren't a lot of, I don't even think that we have, like, none of the health practitioners were given the opportunity for these kind of trainings. So we need to focus on that side of things. Thanks.
Thank you. So what do you think an accessible executive and council looks like, and how will you be accessible to the community?
So for me, accessible is accessibility has a lot of different meaning, but because of my unique identity as an LGBTQ person of color, I wanted to make sure that all the marginalized identities are oftentimes not very heard. I wanted them to be able to voice their concern, to bring that, and also to create that environment where folks can foster. We can foster folks, help them in grow and learn, and be able to have the education that they deserve. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. So next question. In light of increased acts of violence perpetuated against Asian minorities, with COVID-19. What is your plan to advocate and create a safe space for students with this identification?
Yes, thank you for the question, because this is kind of like, I feel like this is one of those questions that actually kind of specifically I feel catered towards my identity, as I am also Asian Pacific Island, so identify as Asian Pacific Islander, and specifically I am Southeast Asian, Vietnamese, Canadian. So yes, I have a lot of strong sentiment personally towards the issue because of the anti-Asian violence acted upon me. But I also wanted to make sure that this is not the first time this type of issue has happened. We know that this type of issue has happened for a long time. It's the same case with the other pandemic, when Ebola was a thing, when H1N1 was a thing. So it wasn't like a first timer event. So this type of rhetoric has been around for the longest time. So I feel like with this kind of issue, we wanted to be able to address I guess like the internalized racism that's embedded into our system, and holding even like DSU or even the entire community of the housing accountable for having this kind of rhetoric, and be able to move past that, be able to provide services and help, and having that anti-oppression training even push further, even outside of I don't know, like health practitioners and mental health worker. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Very important stuff. Sorry, another question from the audience. So how do you plan to support the LGBTQ+ community during COVID and in the post-COVID era?
Yes. So there are a lot of things that I'm passionate about, and I wanted to be able to address and kind of like tackle them, teasing them out one by one. First thing is to have more health accessibility towards the community, and especially when it comes to mental health, health counseling coverage, pushing more. So instead of having that $1,000 minimum cap for the seeing psychologists, I wanted to be able to have that, because with that minimum cap, what it does is it's only limiting the visit that you have with psychologists or any mental health practitioners. I think we should have more of a committed program for mental health, in terms of addressing the mental health needs of students, and also I don't like the idea of having more like a sporadic program that only happen, let's say, one semester or 2 semester, but having it more so committed throughout the year maybe, and having that continuity towards the mental health needs that students want. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much. All right, so I will ask just one more question, and then we'll get into some concluding remarks. So my last question is, why should voters vote for you?
So I personally believe that voters should, folks should just go and vote. Really, I don't really have a certain needs in the sense that, like, folks, it's okay if folks don't need to vote for me, but at the same time, I'm here and I'm here to support Rainbow community folks, and I am all about, like, passionate about helping folks to grow and have a more accessible, more equitable, safe space environment in Dow. So I think that's one of my I guess, like, catchphrase that you say. Thanks, Claire.
All right, thanks so much. So now we have some time for some concluding remarks. So anything else that you'd like to say to those listening?
I think I've already said all what I'm passionate about, but I just wanted to address that. What I'm saying right now can have more and can be improved and can include more voices in the future. And I would love and would look forward to hearing more marginalized, suppressed voice from folks and bring that all into the table. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Tam. All right, so yeah, big thank you to Tam for being here tonight. And that brings an end to the LGBTQ plus community rep question and answer period. So thanks for listening, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, Claire, for being such an awesome host, and thank you to all the candidates that shared today. I just want to let folks know that this wraps up day one of the 2021 DSU winter election debates. Please join us at the same time on Wednesday to hear the debates for the VP Internal, the VP Student Life, and the VP Finance and Operations. I'd also like to remind students that voting opens March 8th and closes at the end of the night on March 9th. And that all these candidates that may be running unopposed still need to be voted in, so they still very much rely on your vote. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you on Wednesday.